Welcome to the product briefing side of AgilePoint's entry to the low-code application platform's Magic Quadrant. Before I get into the platform overview, I'd like to highlight some of the new features added into AgilePoint version 7 since we've last spoken with Gartner. The first of which is a central component of our build from scratch, AgilePoint's built-in data modeler, data entity, the ability to create standalone, data-driven applications, creating compelling user experiences on top of AgilePoint via the page designer, delivering custom-branded native mobile apps through our mobile App Accelerator, bringing those mobile applications offline, as well as a marketplace with quick start templates and UI layouts. So let's get into the platform overview. First, you'll see here that I'm given a choice of authentication provider. AgilePoint supports the concept of bring your own identity, and for today, I'm using AgilePoint's public cloud, or SaaS product. As a result, I'm given a choice of authentication types. If I was using AgilePoint on-premises or in a private or dedicated cloud, I would also see Okta authentication, Active Directory, and ADFS. Next, that brings us to the AgilePoint portal homepage. And what you're seeing here is the out-of-the-box experience. In just another moment, I'll give you a few examples of how this can be customized and tailored for each group, team, or division within a customer's business. Before I do that, let's spend some time in the Work Center. This is the primary end-user area within AgilePoint, and it gives end users quick access to applications, tasks, and end-user level statistics. You'll see here I have an overview of the work items that are being allocated to me from various applications, with an ability to drill into those tasks. You'll see here I have about 4 pages of items to work on, so as a result it's important for me to be able to search for specific items, or sort and filter based on a variety of criteria. You're seeing here that some of them are overdue. Some have higher priority than others, which gives me great ability to prioritize my day based on the most important items. We have a variety of views that correlate to the different roles within a customer's organization, and this, among everything else within the platform, can be closely controlled based on role. I have great access to items that I've worked on in the past here. I can bring up a report view as an example to see a point-in-time view of the application data that's been captured. Now, of course, everything is persisted to a standard SQL database with AgilePoint, but it's nice from an end-user perspective to have this available within the Work Center. When I click on My Applications, I get a personalized view of the applications that have been opened up to me. There is a full permission framework within AgilePoint that controls who can initiate an application, who can design against it, as well as report against the application data. And then lastly here, I have user statistics. Now of course, we'll show you the reporting module a little bit later on, and it's a central component of our build from scratch, but I wanted to show you just the quick at-a-glance information that I can get about the state of my applications to help understand bottlenecks, and to surface up custom reports for specific groups or teams within an organization. In short, I don't need to show the same reports to everyone in the organization. Now, I mentioned that one of the new additions to AgilePoint is the ability to create custom pages. Now here I have the flexibility to surface any sort of media as well as AgilePoint components. Things like reports, applications, task lists, as well as processes. Now what I'm showing on screen here was built on-site for the City of Boston as a part of a POC. Now there were a number of factors that led to AgilePoint's selection as the citywide digitization partner for the City of Boston, and this was just one of them. As you can see there, by clicking onto any one of those tiles, I'm able to launch various AgilePoint applications, as well as other components, giving end users one place to interact with AgilePoint for everything they might need on a day-to-day basis. I have another example here created for a mock finance or banking customer. And again, the ability to give the users a single point of contact for everything they might need on a day-to-day basis. This capability really enables non-designers to create beautiful pages, complete with custom menus, to have a shared homepage for the entire organization, down to individual team-specific pages, and is complete with a permission framework to ensure that the right people are seeing the right pages. Now, one of the most sought-after features in AgilePoint is its ability to meet end users where they're working today. And as you can see here, I have an example of AgilePoint natively embedded within Sharepoint, as well as Salesforce. Now, this is native embedding and does not rely on the use of iframes, as many of our largest customers would deem that to be a security concern and open them up to cross-site scripting attacks. Now, so far, I've just shown Salesforce and Sharepoint, but we've embedded AgilePoint into more than 50 portals: SAP, NetSuite, websites, homegrown technologies, and many others. In short, if the platform can host a custom HTML page, they're a great candidate for this sort of native UI level embedding. Next, that brings us to the data entity component, which, as I mentioned, is a central component for AgilePoint's built from scratch video. This enables us to design data models directly within the browser without relying on database administrator skill sets and tooling like SQL Server Management Studio. Now, to save some time in the build from scratch, I imported a number of entities previously, but I'd like to go through a few of them here just to show you what we've designed and how we did so. So as you can see here, I'm tracking some information about purchase orders and hours worked for various consulting customers. And as you're seeing here, I have the various fields, and they've been associated with UI components on the AgilePoint side. Essentially, the way it works here is I would add a new field, I would associate that with a user interface component, and then specify my column name. Now, despite this being a much more user-friendly abstraction over standard database tables, I still get all of the same parent-child relationships that you would expect with a database. I can easily view the data, as well as get extra layers of security over what you'd see with databases off the shelf. And then lastly, I can see wherever this entity has been used. Just to show you the others that we're using as a part of the application, now all of these are being used to not only simplify the creation of a data model, but helps us automate a large chunk of the application's design. Okay, so let's build a small entity to show you how it works. I'm going to open up another tab here so we can create both of our entities side by side. So the entity that we'll create today will capture information about a customer. I'll give a display name of customer information. And I can choose between the type of text or auto increment for this field. I want to publish this entity. It is active. I want to use the default logging, and I'd like to enable entity permissions. In addition, I can allow import of the records as well as the entity model itself. And lastly, I'll provide a category. Okay, so I'll just add a few fields here. The first is going to be a date control, which will represent the customer's date of birth. I can set some minimum and maximum values, and click Save and New to add another field. Next, we'll use a phone control to capture the customer's phone number. And again, some maximum length and default value options. Next, we'll use the text area to capture their physical address. And lastly, we'll use an email control to capture their email. Okay, so let's switch over to my tab, and I'll make a dependent table. So this will be for customer orders. And for this, we'll use an auto increment field. Okay, so let's add a few other fields here. We'll use a date control to capture their order date. We'll use a number field to capture the order amount, and click Save. Now this is a pretty small entity, but I'd like to connect the two to have the parent and child relationship. Primary field will be the customer name, and the child field display name will be order information. And just like that, I have created a relationship between two tables. Now, paired with data entities are pick lists. And this is what gives us standardized dropdowns, standardized values for our dropdowns. Just to give you a few examples here, for payment method, we have cash, check, credit card, or wire transfer. And when used in conjunction, gives us an ability to rapidly develop a data model without leaving the AgilePoint browser. Now, permission and governance has always been a large focus for us here at AgilePoint. So as a result here, I can manage in bulk the permissions and access for all of my users. As you can see here, I have multiple layers of permission: an owner, a designer, those who can read an entity, create, or edit. And having this ability to manage it centrally ensures that the right levels of access are always being maintained for these custom entities. Next brings us to the application designer. Now what you're seeing on screen here is a process application, but from within this interface, I can create SaaS applications, mobile apps, chatbot applications, as well as applications for IoT. One of the strength areas of AgilePoint has always been its breadth and depth of integration, with 65 integration points supported off the shelf. What's more is that there is great depth of integration for each one of these systems. Let's take a look at Salesforce as an example, with more than 35 activities within Salesforce alone. This really enables our customers to go much further in terms of application complexity before they need to write code. In addition, AgilePoint is truly a platform in every sense of the word. So if there's an integration or an activity that we don't support off the shelf, you can always use our SDK to create new integrations, new activities, and have that one-time development exercise result in a drag-and-drop configurable activity available from this menu here. Next brings us to the UI designer, and we've taken a very similar approach on the UI side as we did with the application designer, with lots of pre-built control types to handle various types of data. Things like labels and text boxes, radio buttons, file uploads, images, currency, repeating components like a subform or a data grid, auto-suggest, and many more. Under advanced controls, they start to become a little more specific. Things like phone controls, email, social security or credit cards, drawing controls, raw HTML, maps, geolocations, and timers. And in addition, we've also brought in some Telerik Kendo controls at no cost into the platform. Now, once I'm designing an application, I'm going to need to bring in some logic. So there's a few different ways that we can do that. AgilePoint's rules are developed declaratively, where I have a condition, and when that condition is met, I have a series of actions. Now what you're seeing here on screen is just showing or disabling controls as an example. But in addition, we can also execute scripts or methods, set values, set as mandatory or not mandatory, as well as triggering a lookup. As an example, when a condition is met, maybe we're calling a service that implements a rule maintained somewhere else. For more complex rule scenarios, I can add multiple rules or chain them together, giving me an ability to easily model the most complex business logic directly here within the application designer. Now, of course, I don't always need to build my rules directly into the application. Through AgilePoint's SDK, I can easily create rules that span multiple applications all at once. I can ensure that my organization's branding guidelines are adhered to by implementing shared CSS that is inherited across all applications, and similarly with JavaScript. To test my logic and integrations, I have a testing UI directly within the designer here. Which gives me an ability to test my rules without having to deploy any of the applications. Now, AgilePoint's form technology is responsive. Now, that being said, I do have device-specific layout and testing tools here within my designer. Now, this isn't often a required step, but does give me an ability to tailor layouts for specific device types and specific orientations without affecting the layouts for the other devices. Once I've built an application, we have support for the full software development lifecycle, with versioning, with each artifact within an application versioned separately, check in and check out, reverting back to previous versions. Application validation will check for errors and completeness in an application. I can declare milestones, as well as with a one-click publish feature, move an application between pre-production environments out into production. As we mentioned earlier, there is a full permission framework, which gives me close control over who can design an application, initiate it, or report against the data within. Many of our customers are also using AgilePoint alongside their favorite DevOps tooling. So via API level integration, I can leverage my favorite CI or CD tooling alongside AgilePoint. Next, this brings us to AgilePoint's administrative console. And from within here, I get great insight into system performance and health. I can also closely control the appropriate levels of access. As we showed earlier, AgilePoint ties in directly with your favorite authentication provider and allows you to maintain users, groups, and roles as you might see fit. When I've selected a role here and navigate over to the Access Rights tab, I have fine-grained control over the ability to manage users, process-related capabilities, access to the various AgilePoint modules, reporting-related permissions, as well as permissions for the application builder. Now, the permissions and governance framework doesn't stop there. As we mentioned, we have many layers of permission for things like entities, which we showed earlier, the application permissions, including permissioning for custom pages built on top of AgilePoint. Now, where I'd like to spend a few moments here is under runtime management. AgilePoint really has an unparalleled ability to manage applications as they're running. And to give you an example here, I'm going to bring up an invoice processing application. Now, one of the things that I'd like to point out here is that there are many versions of this application running side by side, and when combined with some of our reporting functionality, gives a great ability to understand challenger and champion sorts of scenarios. Now, what I'll do here is I'll bring up an older version of this application. Under General Information, I get good overview or at-a-glance information about the application itself. I can see where the application is in its execution. There are views specifically for activities, as well as tasks that have been completed by humans. The event log tracks every action taken within AgilePoint, as every action does raise an event, which can be subscribed to. I can easily view the process or application data captured by an application, as well as see process hierarchy. Now, one of the things that I mentioned earlier was AgilePoint's unparalleled ability to manage executing applications. So here's what I meant by that. You're currently seeing this application in the accounts payable step, but as an example, perhaps some business level exception has occurred. In the case of an invoice processing use case, maybe it's the end of the month, and I need to ensure that I can close the month while still maintaining the appropriate levels of compliance. So as an example, I can easily skip forward, or conversely, roll back and split my process. Again, a very unparalleled level of manageability and ability to handle business level exceptions. Now, earlier I mentioned that there are a number of versions of this application that are running side by side. So what happens when I make changes to my data model, my UI or logic, integrations as an example, to all of those running instances of an application? Well, in the case of AgilePoint, I can easily migrate those up to the newest version. So as you can see here, I'm currently on version 1.10, but there are many newer versions of that application. So let's migrate that up to the newest version. I'm brought to a screen where I can merge the changes or the differences between those two versions of an application, and I can click Confirm Migrate. If I wanted to perform these operations in bulk, I have the ability to save an instruction file and apply these changes en masse. Now, the great thing about this is for everything that's taken, including the rolling back, the migration, it's all maintained within our audit logs. And then lastly here, from a system overview perspective, I get good information about the health of my AgilePoint environment. Now, included in our platform is the ability to generate reports on an ad hoc basis, as well as use some of the out-of-the-box templates. There are more than 30 pre-built application templates that I can choose from, or I can create my own on a custom basis. Okay, so this brings us to the page designer capability that I mentioned earlier. So let's bring up an example. I'll bring up the example that I showed you earlier and give you a sense of the experience to design these custom pages. Now, the intent here was to enable non-designers to create their own custom pages and menus on top of AgilePoint, providing highly personalized experiences for every group or team within the organization. Now, as you can see here, I can easily apply my own CSS. But for example, to add a new row, I would click the plus button here and then add the widget of my choosing. Things like buttons, these can be tied to launch an AgilePoint application. I can easily embed forms or my work center, add rich text or hyperlinks, headings, as well as various types of media, audio, images, and video. I have a number of card options, as well as layouts, which give me complete control over the look and feel of the page. And from here, I can easily preview all of my changes without needing to deploy the page. Okay, so that brings us to AgilePoint's marketplace. Here you'll find 50 pre-built application templates as well as UI components. And these really cover every area of an organization with a predefined schema for different departments or different types of use cases. As you can see here, I have a number of options to choose from, and many of our customers are using these directly out of the box, or they'll customize them with their own integrations, additional logic as an example, right, or custom email notifications. In addition, this is also a great way for new AgilePoint users to get an understanding of how to compose an AgilePoint application. For any one of these, I have a video link that explains the nature of the application, as well as a quick view about the process, if applicable, and the user interface components. Under the Collaborate module, I can discuss application design with fellow developers, as well as collaborate with business users around changes we might make to that application. And then lastly here is the Mobile App Accelerator. This allows us to use clicks instead of code to generate a custom branded native mobile app. The process of designing an application is fairly straightforward. I would walk through a wizard here. I would implement some basic settings. I have all of the same authentication options as I do on the desktop. But my first major decision point is which applications will be exposed through the mobile app. As you can see here, I can select all of the applications or just a couple, giving me flexibility in terms of how AgilePoint users are consuming these applications. I can easily customize my menu options, as well as select the platforms for which I'd like to build this app, including iOS, Android, and Windows Phone. I can bring in my own styling and upload my own images. And at the end, I would simply click Build, and I'll receive a notification when the application is ready to be used. So with that being said, I'd like to bring up an example of a mobile app here. Just a moment ago, I was mainly discussing AgilePoint's custom branded capabilities. But we do also have an out-of-the-box mobile application that comes for free with our platform. And as you can see here, it gives me all of the same capabilities that I would expect on the desktop. I have access to my applications, my tasks, including team tasks, and the same access to the items that I'd started or those that I'd worked on. If I'm going out of the office, I can also easily configure a delegation to send any tasks to a colleague while I'm out of town. Okay, so this concludes the platform overview portion. Let's head over to the build from scratch. I'm given a choice between form-based and process-based applications, and I'll select process-based. Give my application a name. This application will be triggered by a form submission, but there are many other trigger types, as you're seeing on screen. And I'll give this 2 swim lanes. Next, I'll want to select a primary data source. In this case, I'm going to select AgilePoint's data entity, which is our built-in data modeler. And I'll want to select from custom entities only. There are also out-of-the-box entities that we could use, but in this case, I'll use one that I built previously. And I can also bring over related entities. So this will drop me into the application designer. And as a first step, I'll want to drag over a start task. Now, since I'm building this from scratch, I'll start with a blank form, but we can always reuse forms that we built previously in other applications. Now this will drop me into the form designer here. And the first thing that I want to do is apply CSS so I can have the same style across all of the forms in my application. I'll add new CSS. And copy from my clipboard. So let's enable this CSS here. Click OK. And now I have nice styling for all of the user interfaces in my application. So let's begin designing the user interface here. And to start off, I'm going to use a raw HTML control, which will allow me to bring in the Gartner logo.
I could have also used an image control for the same functionality.
Okay. Let's do one more raw HTML control to get some dividers here. And I want to drag this all the way across. Okay. So now I can start dragging and dropping from my primary data source, which we defined earlier. You'll see all of the fields here on the right-hand side. So I'll start off with submitted by. And I want to give this a default value. So to do that, I'm going to expand my Process Data Explorer. And under System Data, I will bring in the user's full name. Next, I'll want to do the submitted date. And again, have a token value to show the current date. Okay. Next, I'll want to bring in some of the customer names. So to do that, I'm going to select a drop-down control. And this will be a lookup list. So I'll need to add a lookup source. I'll configure the lookup against an AgilePoint data entity. But as you can see, there are a number of different options here. And this is going to be a name and value pair. I'll select customer details and use the customer name for both the name and the value. Okay, so my lookup has been configured. So let's just test it quickly to make sure that it's working as expected. Okay, so far so good. So next, I'm going to use a text box for the customer contact person. I will use a phone control to bring over that contact's phone number. An email control for their email address. And then a text box for their physical address. And let's align this here with the other cell. Section, a subform. And I want to expand out form data and drop the customer timesheet on top. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do here is I'll add a drop-down list. I'm going to bind this to the customer PO entity. Under Configure, I'm going to select the list type of pick list. And I'll select Customer PO pick list. Okay, let's add a few more columns here. Next, I'm going to add assigned hours. This is the number of hours that the customer has available. Consumed hours for what they've used so far. A description. The dates that we've done the work. And the hours that we've worked. Now I want to line this up here. So I'm going to go back to Configure and have it display 2 rows. And I'll want to mark a few of these fields here as read-only. Okay. I'm going to look up against the data entity. This is going to be multiple columns. And I'll select the customer PO details. I'm going to unselect everything but assigned hours. And from my data model, I will select assigned hours. Next, I'll implement a filter condition where customer PO is equal to customer PO, and click Finish. I want this to trigger on a specific value change of customer PO. This lookup will be against the database. I'm going to select my access token. And this will be multiple columns. Here I'm going to input a query. And let's validate it. Okay, great. So I want this lookup to execute on a specific field value change, and I'm going to select customer PO. I'm going to bind this to the total worked hours entity, and then add a formula. So we want the consumed hours plus work time. Okay. Now, I want to add a rule here on this control where the total worked hours is greater than assigned hours. And if that is true, I want to show a message. The total consumed hours cannot be greater than the assigned hours. And I want to set a field value for PO work time. And I want these rules to execute independently. Let's do one more formula. And I want the sum of the PO work time. And if I change this to an asterisk here, this is going to get all of the values from all of the rows. And let's make total worked hours invisible, because we don't need it for the form. And let's test our logic. And we'll add another row here. Okay, so far so good. To get the remaining customer information. Now this could always be done using a lookup to a database, or in this case, AgilePoint's data entity. But for the purposes of the briefing, we'll call the web service. So the first thing that I'll want to do here is create an app token. Going to input the URL here. Okay. This is going to be multiple columns. And on the request, I'm going to take the customer name and drop it over to customer name. And for the response, and I want this to execute on a specific field value change of customer name. So let's test that here. All right, looking good so far. And begin working on our next step. I'm going to name this task Submit Timesheet. Optionally, we can bring this offline, give it a different priority, or a different service level completion date. But for now, we'll leave it as it is, with the process initiator being responsible for this step. Okay. So let's begin working on the next step. So what we'll do here is we'll add a new form. Call this Approved Timesheet. And I want to base it off of an existing form. Okay, so I've marked all of my fields as read-only. And let's add another divider here. So I'll use the raw HTML control. Drag that all the way across. I want to indicate an approval decision, so I'll select a radio button. We'll call this Approver Decision. I'll stack this horizontally and give two options: approved and rejected. Make this mandatory. Now I want to give a way for the approver to add comments. This will also be a mandatory field. drag it all the way over. Now I want to implement a rule here. Currently, approver comments is mandatory. So when approver decision is equal to approved, I'm going to set as not mandatory approval comments. Okay. Work on the remainder of the process. So the next thing we'll want to do here is we'll want to add a condition. I want the else connector to show on the top. This will be check approval status. And let's build our condition. So to do that, I'm going to drag and drop the approver decision from my form data equals approve. And as you can see there, I have validated the expression successfully. So from here, I want to connect this up to the initial submission step and give the user a chance to resubmit. And from here, let's add a couple of email notifications. Now we have some predefined email templates, but I'm going to add a new one. We're going to send this to the initiator of the process. And our content here will be, your timesheet has been approved. Now in this case here, I have a predefined email template that I'll import. But as you can see, we have full HTML markup capabilities here. And as you can see, it's formatted everything nicely for me. I'm bringing in data dynamically from my data source and displaying it here on screen. And then we'll do the same thing here for the rejected email. Again, I will add a new template. Again, send this to our process initiator. Okay, let's add one more integration, this time from the process level, and finish the configuration for our application. I'm going to go to my stencil, find Sharepoint Integration, and drag over the Create List Item shape. This will allow us to record consultant hours in a Sharepoint list. And we follow the same process for any of the integrations that AgilePoint offers off the shelf. First, I'll select my access token. Next, my site. And finally, I can enter the list. Okay, so let's click on the List tab and map the appropriate fields. Okay, so we'll take customer name and drag it over to the customer name field. Submitted by will be the consultant name. Total hours, we'll go to hours worked, and the submitted date. So that completes our final integration. Let's rename our swim lanes. And walk through configuring our last human activity. We've named this task Approved Timesheet, given the user 1 day to complete it, with again the ability to bring this task offline. For demo purposes, I've left the participant as the process initiator, but by clicking this button here, I can easily assign the task to that user's manager. And then click Finish. So let's save and check this in. When I check this in, I have full version support for all of the artifacts being versioned independently, check in and check out for team-based development, revert back to any previous version of the application. The validation button here will check for errors and completeness of the process, milestones, with one-click publish to move this between environments, including from dev to test and from test to production. My application permission framework and cloning applications here give me an ability to easily modify this application for use among different teams. And I can closely control who can design, initiate, and report against the data within this application. This application is launched from a custom landing page with a menu, various types of media hosted, as well as AgilePoint components, things like UI, process, and reports. I'll click the link to launch the application. Select my customer's name and add a few hours that I've worked against various purchase orders. We'll add a second row. And then click Submit. Now, as an option, we could have added email-based task notifications, but for now, I'll take it from my inbox. I'll open up the process viewer so we can follow along with our progress, and open the task. Once I select Approved, the comments field becomes not mandatory, and I can click Submit. Now that we've approved the task, shortly I will receive an email notification, and the hours will be recorded to Sharepoint. Here's my notification. And as you can see, the hours were recorded in Sharepoint. Okay, for the reporting piece, I've switched to a machine where I've run this process a few times. So I'll start off by adding a new report. We have a number of out-of-the-box report templates, but for today, I'll select a blank report. On my report, I'd like to have a header, and we'll display the date and time that the report was run. I'll select a theme here for my report and click OK. Next, let's select my table. For this report, I'll select the Customer PO Details table, and you can see the columns underneath. I'll implement a filter where the customer name is equal to a specific value, and we'll give the option to select multiple customers within the report. The caption will be the customer name, and to select the customers, we'll implement a drop-down list with the option to show all customers. Let's preview our data. Okay, for this report, I'll want to show the created by column, customer PO, customer name, and the assigned hours. Now I'll want to give these columns a little more friendly name and give the ability to sort the columns. So I'll select Sortable for all columns and give these better names. Optionally, I can control the width as well as the alignment for these columns. But for now, let's go ahead and add some visualization. Now, as you can see here, there are multiple chart types, but for today, I'm going to select a bar chart. The column name is going to be the customer name. And the data column is going to be the assigned hours. And I'd like to show the sum of those hours. Okay, let's preview our report. Okay, let's make some changes here with respect to the colors. Okay, so far it's looking pretty good. Let's include a trend line and add the ability to export this report in a few different formats. Let's select Excel, PDF. PDF gives me some export options here in terms of size. And then include the ability to distribute this report via email. Okay. So let's save this report. Now our report is ready to be consumed. Okay, now that we've completed the build from scratch, I'd like to quickly go through the requirements list and how we've addressed them. We've showed how to build a timesheet application that featured data entry as well as process. We demonstrated how mobile and tablet-specific layouts can be created without affecting the web experience. We implemented business logic to check for hours worked against available hours for a particular customer. We showed a summary screen for the manager to approve the timesheet request. We called an external web service to populate customer details, though that also could have been used via lookup to a database or AgilePoint's built-in data modeler data entity. We showed developer collaboration through check-in and check-out to facilitate team-based development, as well as the Collaborate module, where developers can collaborate amongst themselves, as well as with business users around application design and execution. The Validate function will verify platform and application capabilities. We showed how to validate data entry into a particular field, one-click deployment, the administrator console. We built a report from scratch to show reporting and analytics, as well as the governance and security features out of the box from AgilePoint. That's all. Thanks for watching.